Victory in Ukraine, is it an example for Israel? And the state of the war in Israel and Gaza. You don't need any more introduction from me. That's what we're going to be talking about for the next hour with a panel that we're very, very proud is a little bit different than perhaps what you saw in your program. So let me introduce them. Nancy Okail is the president and CEO of the Center for International Policy, which describes itself as a progressive voice on U.S. foreign affairs. Petro Poroshenko, former president of Ukraine. Thank you very much, sir. Alicia Kearns, member of Parliament, member of the Tory party, and chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, the first woman to have that title, but also formerly in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, working on counterterrorism and anti-ISIS efforts. So we'll talk about that as well. And Muaz Mustafa. Thank you so much. Executive Director of the Syrian Emergency Task Force, a nonprofit in Washington who many of us work with, whose goal is to bring an end to the killing in Syria. So I've got about an hour. We'll talk a lot about Israel and Gaza, and we'll have lots of time for your questions. And I encourage you to think about what you want to ask, because there is a lot to ask. Nancy Okail, let me start with you. How did we get here?
Well, first of all, I mean, thank you so much for having me here, and thank you for giving me the time, and it's not the first year. And before I answer your question, I just want to say how difficult it is to talk about the issues that we're talking about. And it's difficult for me personally to be sitting here, and not just because of all the death and all the catastrophe that we are witnessing, but also it's a deja vu, because 2 years ago, we were sitting here, just Mr. President was sitting here, I was sitting here, and in your seat, Nick, Vladimir Karamurza was sitting. Vladimir is not here today and is not in that seat. He is sitting in a Russian prison. And the reason why he's in the Russian prison, because he was defying Putin. And he was there, as it's written, for his anti-war views. He was charged with discrediting the military, which is an absurd charge, discrediting the military. It's actually flattering. I mean, you say, I write an op-ed and I discredit a military. It's just like one of the largest in the world. But it's actually, I mean, it does not reflect power of Putin. It actually reflects fragility. I mean, that a few words could challenge you to the extent that you have to lock someone up and not get them there. And this fragility comes from the absence of legitimacy. This is what it does. And I want to be clear that I'm not making any comparison here between Russia and Ukraine and Israel and Palestine. And I'm actually told Peter that I disagree with the title of this panel, but because it's so different in so many ways, the context, the moral equivalence, political equivalence, so many different things. And it's not because the Middle East is so complicated. I mean, like, I've been working on this for 25 years, and I don't remember once that I sat in a panel or spoke to people until people always tell me is like, yeah, but the Middle East is so complicated. No, it's actually not complicated. It's actually very clear. And if anything, this war gave it even far more clarity than before. And I can tell you, like, really straightforward how we ended up here.
As quickly as
I can. Because, well, first of all, there is the complete absence of a serious political path for Palestinians to live with dignity and rights and equality like other people. Second, a complete lack of accountability for all the atrocities and crimes on all sides that we have seen over the years. And third, and this is important, is the flawed assumptions upon which the US base its foreign policy towards the Middle East. And I will focus on this one, particularly because I love to criticize the US government. Not for anything, it's just because I'm new in a democracy. I just became American 2 years ago. And it's fun to know, it's like, oh, it comes with a feature that you can criticize your government and not disappear the next day. And also, I mean, like, I was born in Russia and raised in Egypt, so you can imagine. And I came here because I was sentenced to prison in Egypt, also for criticizing the government for its corruption. And the reason why there's a problem with US foreign policy towards the Middle East, because there is an assumption that you can have deals with governments or leaders of government that are not representative of their people, and believe that those deals would be sustainable, and they somehow will make the Palestinian issue disappear if they're not included.
And we'll certainly talk about that. That is one of the premises, although the administration would reject the idea that it was about disappearing the Palestinian issue, but certainly one of the premises to go up over the top of the Palestinians. The Trump administration and the Biden administration has tried to do Saudi-Israel normalization. We'll get to that. But Alicia Kearns, you wrote remarkably op-eds earlier this year in which you didn't have the details, of course. You didn't know that Hamas was going to do what it did, the kind of heinous terrorist attack it did. But you did predict that there would be violence coming out of Gaza between Israel and Palestinians. Why do you think that you knew that, or what did you see that led you to be able to say that before October the 7th?
So in January this year, devastatingly, I did write, and I said to my Prime Minister that we were going to see the Gaza crisis of 2023. I didn't expect it to come in this form. I did not. No one could have predicted the crimes against humanity that we saw Hamas perpetrate in Israel. But if we listened to our partners in the region, we should have known we were moving to crisis point. Drugs coming across the border from Syria had turned to weapons. That's an important change in attitude and behaviors. Palestinian jihadist groups, not Hamas, were aggravating the situation, acting up more and more. Iran was becoming more aggressive and more muscular in its near region. And then within Israel, we had 100,000 people out in the streets protesting. We had increased tensions at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and we all know how important that is. We also saw statements from the Israeli government saying there was no such thing as the Palestinian people, and standing in front of maps that said that Jordan had to belong to Israel and eradicated the presence of Palestine. And in the absence of that, there was no meaningful political movement. Yes, there were talks behind the scenes that took place between certain countries, but there was no meaningful delivery on any of those meetings that took place behind the scenes. And so, no, I couldn't have seen the way it has, but it is, again, a failure. And I was very critical of my government in particular, that when we tilted to the Indo-Pacific, if you tilt to something, you are tilting away from something. And we were tilting away from the Middle East. And in my view, our historic responsibilities there, none so more dangerous than Israel-Palestine.
My job is to ask direct questions. Some of you may like my questions, some of you may not. Some of you may like the answers, some of you may not. But this is a really important question and an answer to ask directly. Muaz Mustafa, do you believe Israel's campaign is making Israel more secure?
Thank you. Thanks, Nick, for this question. I want to say it was an honor to be at Halifax. And it's an honor to be on this distinguished panel. And I'm speaking to you here as I'm actually Palestinian. My father is Palestinian and my mother is Syrian. In Syria, 14 million people think. In Syria,
Just keep going.
In Syria, 14 million people have been displaced. Yep. About 1 million, I know the UN stopped counting at 300, 400,000 have been killed. Hundreds of thousands are in jails. They've been murdered by Iranian-aligned militia groups, IRGC, Russia, in the most horrific ways, of course, by aiding the Assad regime, a criminal dictator who France just put out a red notice for his arrest. my Palestinian side have also, my family on the Palestinian side have become refugees. And I'm here not speaking about the importance, not from a humanitarian perspective. Let's look at this logically from what makes us safer, what makes the democracies in the West safer, what makes Israel safer, what gives, what allows us to be on a path not into a dark tunnel where we don't know where we're going to end up, and that's where I feel we are, but to a place where we can see stability, peace in the future for all the peoples of the Middle East. So to answer your question, Nick, 1 out of 57 people in Gaza have been killed and injured since October 7th. That's Siri. And we have as well dozens of journalists that have been killed. I checked with my good friend Ayman Mhanna from the Samir Kassir Foundation in regards of these journalists that have been killed there. Food and water and other necessities for civilians have not been allowed in. Now, I understand that it is no easy challenge to address the horrific attack that happened on October 6th and how and Israel here is a nation that I'm sure is angry as it should be over what's happened. But if every child in the Middle East and across the world are going through their TikToks and seeing pictures of children that have been killed, seeing hospitals that have been bombed, seeing 1.1 million civilians that have been displaced within Gaza for now, and then you compare that number with how many Hamas operatives have been killed, I don't know, 200, 300. If the goal is to eradicate Hamas, and we've now over 12,000 civilians that have been killed, and let's say 200 to 300 are killed. And let's say Hamas has, I don't know the numbers, 40,000, 50,000 fighters. Is this a sustainable way? Are the claims of the Israeli government that it's doing the best it can to stop the killing or death of civilians, is that just a claim, or is that what is being practiced on the ground in Gaza? So it's not an appeal for humanity, but it's an appeal for logic in the long term. Such a campaign where there are thousands and thousands more children being killed than Hamas fighters is not something that makes, frankly, Israel nor the West safer. And you can see that in Syria. I just came back from Syria. I go to multiple US military bases, both in Syria and Iraq, to help break a siege on a camp in southern Syria called Rukban, a camp besieged by Iran, Russia, and Assad. And now we see on average, I think, of 3.5 attacks against US forces in these areas. Again, this is an Iranian plan for Syria and Iraq, having nothing to do with Palestinian lives. It is a long-term strategy, but now they have the audacity to do so even more because they're seeing how the international sort of community is seeing the fight in Gaza as being a place of potentially a double standard in these ways. And so I think that the way that this war has been has been going on is not something that makes us safe. And I think we need to take a real look at how we can, how that can change. And one example is allowing food and water into there. And Cindy McCain, who John McCain is a dear friend, has been great in that. Thank you.
And your criticisms are echoed in public and private by the U.S. government, who has been pushing the Israeli military to use certain tactics that aren't necessarily the ones they've been using, and to allow more humanitarian aid. Petro Poroshenko, Mr. President, President Biden has linked Israel's effort against Hamas with Ukraine's effort against Russia, and this forum has done the same. Do you see that linkage between Israel's effort against Hamas and Ukraine's effort against Russia?
Thank you very much indeed, Nick. First of all, I want to thank Peter and the whole team of the Halifax International Security Forum, all my friends, for their unique and necessary solidarity with Ukraine. And this year, the whole topic is start with the word Ukraine. Why it's happened so? Because now is a decisive moment of the war. I want to start with the attempt to pay tribute to Ukrainian soldiers. I have a phone call this night where the brother of my chief security advisor, chief diplomatic advisor, today is in the Gulay Pole and starting the tactical offensive operation this night. I have a phone call from Avdiivka, where...
A city in eastern Ukraine that Russia is currently bombarding.
Yeah, and it is, when war was started, it was 27,000 people. Today in Avdiivka is 500 people. And do you know how many Russian terrorists and occupants were destroyed in Avdiivka during the last 24 hours? 451. This is the efficiency of the Ukrainian armed forces, providing their work and their job for protecting the world every single day. At the same time, it is a price Ukraine pays every single day of delay. Delay of supplying weapons, delay for not technological weapons supply, delay of the sanction strengthening mechanism. Hundreds of civilians, hundreds of soldiers. At the same time, I want to deliver you the message that Ukraine is not fighting because Putin come not for Donbass, not for Zaporizhia and Kherson, and even not for Kiev. Why I know that? From Putin. At the beginning of the war, President Biden, Prime Minister of Great Britain, Chancellor of Germany and French President have a negotiation with Putin, trying to deliver arguments not to launch the war. And do you remember what was Putin's answer? Several ones. First, we do not start the war, guarantee it. What does it mean? Please don't trust Putin. No one single word. He's a KGB officer. He never telling the truth. Second, let's have a negotiation with Putin. Putin said, okay. What is my ultimatum? First, NATO should go back to the borders of 1997. All attack missiles should go out on the Eastern Europe.
And the connection with Israel?
And Ukraine should be zone of influence of Russia together with the old Soviet, as called, bloc. This is why Putin launched the war. Not the demilitarization or not denazification, no. That was the war against the whole free world.
And Mr. President, the connection with Israel?
Yeah. And last word, but Ukraine is fight for the whole free world. Why? Ukraine is a democracy. And what connection with Israel? Israel is a democracy also. This is the fight against Ukrainian democracy because Putin started the war in year 2014 just because Ukraine want to be NATO member and EU member. And we provide the reform. And the source of the war, the reason of the war, the initiator of the war in Ukraine and definitely in Israel is Putin, Russia, and Russian acts of evil. Iran, North Korea. So we have the same enemy. Only one difference. Ukrainian war is 50 times bigger than Israeli. 50 times by territory, 50 times by battlefield, 50 times by military power. And I'm absolutely confident when Ukraine will win, it would not only for Ukraine, the victory. It would be the victory for Belarus. Hello, my Belarusian friend. It would be the victory for Moldova. It would be the victory for Georgia. And please believe, it would be the victory for Israel. That's why President Biden is absolutely right. We have one enemy. And what we need to have this victory? Weapon, sanction, and unity. unity between Ukraine and Israel. Because sometimes when I speak with the Israeli Prime Minister, his message was, yeah, we understand, we are together with you. But we have no right to irritate Putin.
Well, yeah, we want to get into whether Israel and Ukraine are united in a second.
And I said, please, believe me, some of Ukrainian leaders also hate an idea to irritate Putin. Nothing depends on you. Nothing depends on us. Alicia is absolutely right. Putin will attack using the terrorists. And nobody knows when it's happened. Tomorrow, Putin can attack on Balkan. Tomorrow, Putin can attack on Africa. Tomorrow, Putin can attack Middle East. And that's why we should keep the unity.
So President Biden has been clear on the unity. He has also been clear on his priority before October the 7th in the Middle East being U.S.-Saudi normalization. The idea that the future of the region is an economic one that goes through Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Riyadh into India and Europe. This is something that the Trump administration started, Biden administration has been focused on. Nancy, is that the right U.S. policy?
No. This is the straight answer for many reasons. Going back to the point of the assumption that you can partner with authoritarian regimes, even if you're partnering with them on economic projects, supply chain, issues related to climate, if you think that those deals are viable and sustainable while they're being conducted, I wouldn't even particularly with Saudi Arabia, you're not having a deal with a country, you're having a deal with a person.
MBS.
This person, MBS, and this person happened to be a murderer. And I mean, it's not my words, I mean, it is President Biden's words.
U.S. intelligence finding that MBS was knowledgeable of and perhaps ordered the killing of Jamal Khashoggi.
To be precise, you're right. He was knowledgeable. And this is, I mean, well, first of all, I mean, when people, particularly in the region, see President Biden calling MBS and he's going to make him a pariah, and then the next day there is like the fist bump, the credibility of the U.S., not just in the Arab world, but the global South, is eroded because of that. Because people understand that, I mean, what we are talking about, you're asking about the connection here and the whole paradigm around Ukraine, that this is not just about Ukraine. This is about democracy. This is about, preserving our values and freedom and human rights. But when it comes to the Middle East, it seems perfectly okay to continue having those relations. And those, the thing is, those normalizations was also based on another flawed concept that it is like weapons for peace, because it was more a deal of U.S. defense based on arms deals.
Security guarantees for Saudi and civilian
rather than an issue of normalization. Right. Because like with the Abraham Accords, actually the countries that had this were not in war with Israel. The main issue was with the Palestinian, and this is the issue that was ignored. Again, thinking it's just going to go away if we continue into that path.
Alicia, Kearns, let's stick with this regional look. As I mentioned at the top, you have a lot of experience with Daesh, with ISIS. The Israeli argument, and one of the key points that Israel has been making, is that Hamas is ISIS, ISIS is Hamas. Do you agree?
No, not in any way. The only similarity between the two is how grotesque they are willing to act, that they are embracing fully the title of terrorist and are proud to do so. But Hamas is a political, Islamist, territorial-focused organization. Daesh was an apocalyptic, global, Takfiri, Salafi, jihadist organization. They are different. And I understand why Israel wants to put the two of them together. But we have to be really cautious when we do so, because it doesn't actually help in the long term. In the same way as, and look, Israel didn't have time to plan how they were going to respond to this attack. But I wish they hadn't called it a war. It should have been a counter-terrorism operation, because they are not at war with the people of Gaza. They are not at war with the 1.2 million children. They are at war in a terrorist operation with Hamas. And a terrorist operation is precise, it is specific, it is focused, and it takes them down. And yes, it takes time. I also reject it because the comparison to the operation against Daesh, and I spent many years working to defeat them, it was very different. We were not allowed to go into a territory and liberate it from Daesh, even though liberation, surely you think, do it as quickly as you can. We were not allowed to liberate somewhere until we had a reconstruction plan in place. There was 300,000 hours of RPAS, so drone flight hours, for every airstrike that took place. It was a very different operation. And I believe that Israel has the ability, because it controls the airspace, the maritime space, the entry, the ground all around Gaza, that it too could be operating in a more patient and calm manner. Because currently, destroying civilian infrastructure, even if terrorists are in it, is about preparing for a ground war. What we're not seeing is the use of ground-penetrating weapons. What we're not seeing so much is a focus on the tunnels themselves and getting in and either destroying them or using sponge bombs to make them be unable to be used. So the premise I have to reject, and I understand why you would use it, I understand that we grieve with the people of Israel, and I understand the emotional desire to do it. But as a politician, I think I have a responsibility to say that they are not the same, and that the comparison is actually unhelpful for Israel in the long term.
Well, as Mustafa, we're talking about the region now, not just Israel, Gaza, and we cannot talk about the last 40 days or so without mentioning a number. It was 57 or 58, I believe, on Thursday. You were telling me it's probably one or two more, so let's call it 60. 60 attacks by Iranian-backed groups on U.S. troops and their coalition partners across Iraq and Syria since October the 7th. One of the U.S. stated policy goals, perhaps the highest U.S. stated policy goals, is to prevent spread of this conflict. Has the conflict already spread?
You know, the stated policy goal even before the October 7th attack and what the job was as far as the director of Middle East North Africa at the White House was to keep Syria and to keep the Middle East off of the president's desk. I think the president's desk is essentially on fire as far as the Middle East is concerned, and Syria is very much back on there. You can't just put something on the back burner and hope that it goes away. And so, first of all, over 70 attacks at this point. Okay. Yes, sir. And what has happened all along, and by the way, by ignoring Syria, that's what paved the way for Putin to invade Russia, re-invade Russia the way that he has done.
Or invade Ukraine. Yeah.
By Ukraine, I'm sorry, the way that he's occupies Russia but invaded Ukraine, and he. And during all of currently right now, and this brings me back to the first question you asked, which is the way that the war is being conducted in Gaza. Is that making Israel safer? Is that making the West safer? Well, the fact is no one celebrates the death of children at the hands of Israeli bombs in Gaza as much as Putin, as much as Iran, as much as these Iranian-aligned militia groups that not only do that, then try to and they don't care. These are crocodile tears. They don't care about Palestinian kids whatsoever, just like they don't care about the Syrians that they've slaughtered, including hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in Syria, refugees that they've killed, including in Yarmouk camp, which was besieged by Iran, Russia, and the Assad regime. But now they also use, again, the disproportional response that's ongoing in Gaza to say, okay, it is fair game to go after the United States military in these places because the United States is Israel. This is not an American flag, it's an Israeli flag. These are not American soldiers, Israeli soldiers. And if you saw in Nasrallah's speech, You know, he didn't open a front in the north with Israel, you know, a fear that still exists. But he did say that the so-called Islamic resistance of Iraq will conduct more and more attacks against US forces with more sophisticated weapons, and he's kept that promise at a huge range. I mean, to see the audacity of these Iranian-aligned militia groups attacking US forces in daylight regularly, even just very recently, is something I think that again shows that the way this war is being prosecuted in Gaza is already resulting in a lot of other complications in the region overall, as opposed to the fact that if we stood with the Syrian people who are fighting against Iranian-aligned militia groups, against Putin, against Assad, and by the way, got less than maybe 1% of the military aid that Ukraine has got, would help us not be in the place that we're here today. And I want to reiterate, this panel would be even more accurate if it said, you know, victory in Ukraine, example for Syria. Because at the end of the day, these are the very same pilots, the very same airplanes that are killing Ukrainian children, that are killing Syrian and Palestinian children in Syria regularly. And now as the world is distracted with what's unfolding in Gaza, the uptick in attacks has only increased, not just against US troops, but against these civilians, causing even more refugees.
Yeah. Petro Poroshenko, Moaz brought up something that we've seen Russia do, which is in social media and regular media and in its diplomacy, highlight the cause of Gaza, highlight the cause of the Palestinians. Again, crocodile tears, but it clearly sees an advantage in doing that politically, especially in the global south. Do you see something even more direct? Do you see Russia's involvement or Russian proxy involvement ahead of October 7th with Hamas?
I'm absolutely confident about the Russian involvement, and this is the military crime which should be immediately investigated. I personally know, as a president of Ukraine, what is the style of Wagner. They attack us since year 2014. They use the same tactics at Hamas in Israel. They call it meat assault, no matter how many terrorists will die. They do not give them any chance to go back by open the fire. And Wagner instructed training the Hamas terrorists on the Middle East, including Syria, probably in Gaza. And with that situation, this is another evidence. We have one single enemy, acts of evil. And this is another reason why we should be united. Next year, it would be, can you imagine, 70 elections, 7-0, for more than 3 billion people. Please, do not allow to make Ukraine as a hostage of the election campaign. Because we're talking about values, we're not talking about political victory, money, or anything else. You should choose between money and values. And other things. There is no gray zone in the Ukrainian war. Either white or black. And if you want to sit aside, you are in a black side. If you want to postpone the decision, you are on a black side. If you want to stop, suspend, or use Ukrainian matter for any other reason, you are on the Putin side. Because this is delay, and price we pay for delay is enormous. I'm very much pleased for our partners. Very much pleased for the weapons. Without you, we pay significantly bigger price. But if you delay for 1 year, we let Putin to build up Surovikin line.
Yeah.
If you delay for 1.5 years, you help Putin to develop his anti-air defense system. And today, when we have an offensive operation in Avdiivka, we have a full air dominance of the Russian Air Force. That's why, please, do not delay. Day before yesterday, I was in the position on the east of our country, having seen and even driving the American Abrams. Bravo. We needed 1 year ago.
Yeah.
But at least now, it is strengthening our community. But please take into account, this is absolutely different war. The world never have this type of the war. You can ask military person about that.
Yeah.
This is the war of drones. This is the war of radio-electronic warfare system. And the effectiveness of the small and cheap FPV drones can be bigger than the big high-accuracy artillery.
Yeah.
That's why I, for my own money, delivered 2,000 FPV drones to our offensive troops. Please, keep unity. Please, do maximum you can. For example, you said that we have a discussion on the budget in US. Please, use the money, partners frozen, as a Russian assets.
I'm being given
300 billion, please send immediately to strengthening Ukrainian army, because this is the best investment you even can imagine.
Let me, I'm being told that we only have so much time, so let me go to questions quickly, because I'm sure there are going to be a lot for this panel, and we'll try and get to as many questions as there are, and then we'll move on to the next panel. So, all right, maybe not. All right, all the way in the back.
Hi, thank you. My name is Siddharth Varadarajan, and I'm a journalist from New Delhi, India. Thank you very much for this panel. And I can't help feeling that somewhere down the line, we are doing a disservice to Ukraine and the people of Ukraine by making what I believe is a lazy comparison with the Israel-Palestine war. The last I checked, Ukraine has not invaded any country. Ukraine does not occupy any other people's territory. Ukraine does not use, I saw the statement by the WFP.
Sir, just briefly, yeah.
So I mean, Gaza is people of Gaza on the verge of starvation. This is not something Ukraine is doing, right? So I'm saying by making this kind of a comparison, we are doing a disservice. Does the panel agree to Ukraine?
Sure, Alicia Kearns.
So the first thing I'd say is we have given Ukraine consistently enough to survive, not to win. That is a moral abdication. I remember when we sat in the Munich Security Conference a year ago, and world leaders stood up and celebrated that Ukraine was still free, that Ukraine was still standing, as if that was our success story. It is shameful that a year on, we were saying, thank God Ukraine is still standing, and not that we have protected them and given them enough to beat them. When it comes to the comparisons, there's lots of points being made at the moment about, Joseph Borrell said that the EU has lost a lot of its support from the global south because of its position on supporting Israel's right to defense, although right to defense within international humanitarian law. The question I want to make when it comes to comparison is why are there such double standards? Where was the global south or the middle countries when it came to Ukraine? Why is it when I go around the world, the people I ask for bilaterals with are not my traditional partners, but the countries who have refused to speak out and support Ukraine? And yet now, they are the ones speaking out against Israel. Where is the qualification in that? But another point I'd make about fairness and qualification is, why do we have Western countries running around saying that Zelensky needs to do more on corruption? Zelensky needs to hold an election. Zelensky needs to get hold of himself. But there are no calls for Netanyahu to hold an election. There are no calls for Netanyahu to step down. There are no calls for Netanyahu to face up to the trial that he is going to go through. We have to stop having these double standards. Let us recognize that we are not happy with the way things are going. But the global south do not get to now shout in support of Palestine when they were silent on Ukraine. And that is a double standard nobody is calling out.
Let me try and get one or two more questions quickly. All right, so Senator, and then I have one more over here, I think. Yeah. Mike's coming.
Thank you.
Is the mic on?
It will be in a second, I'm sure.
Okay, just keep going.
I want to have you elaborate a little
Yeah, most.
elaborate a little bit. When this conflict with Hamas started, there was enormous horror at what it had done to Israel. And you defined what should happen as Israel responding as a counterterrorism as opposed to a war on Palestine. And even that last question, there was a the term that was used was Israel versus Palestine. Given if it were a counterterrorism activity as opposed to a war, we would not be flattening Gaza. And what is your assessment of any possible good outcome that is going to occur with this war plan that has included so much bombing and now a ground campaign? And what would be a way to right it?
Alicia, Kearns, hold on for 1 second. Let me just try and get one more question because we are rapidly running out of time.
Hi everyone, my name is Michaela. I am one of the 15 at 15 winners. My question is it possible that other countries such as Russia, North Korea, and China will help Iran in backing Hamas?
Sure. So, Muaz, why don't you take that one, and then we'll come back to Alicia, Kearns.
Sure. I think that for Russia and for Iran, I mean, Iran has historically been the supporter of Hamas in terms of providing them weapons and financial support. I think for Russia, it is, and Iran, they're in the exact same league. And I think for Russia and Iran, their whole point is that, and this goes beyond specifically Israel, I think their whole goal is that the West democracies, they are hypocritical, they don't work, that they do this moral equivalency between, you know, the way people live in Russia or China or Iran in the West, that, you know, that it's somehow, you know, the same equivalency in freedom or in the ability to protect minorities or and so on. And so all of these groups that don't believe in democracy and freedom stick together, and I think that's generally something that you can count on. But what's really, really important is that for democracies to uphold the values that they speak, all the time, and it is more difficult. It's more difficult, as we've heard in earlier panels, for democracies to even make decisions. But that's why democracies should be resolved in their support of Ukraine, and democracies should be resolved in their support of the Syrian people, because at the end of the day, there you have indigenous populations on the ground fighting on their own land against invaders, against terrorists, against people that want to hurt them. But when we don't stick to our values, and when we do sometimes have our own double standards, that empowers them. That's why when we see, unfortunately, kids die in Gaza that maybe could have been saved, Russia and Iran use that to garner more support.
Alicia Kearns, why don't you take that one on quickly, and then we'll also let Nancy do it. And
so on the Crinks point, I would just say they already are supporting them, but I also would really urge this audience. We have to stop making this false conclusion that all these Crinks are best friends and are in bed with each other. It's just not the reality, and if we're going to separate them from each other, we need to stop saying that China and Russia are best friends and that they genuinely want the best for each other. They don't. On the point about how this is prosecuted, none of us will ever forget where we were when we saw the first videos coming through on our Twitter. As a mother, I was in bed with my 2 children and I hugged them so tight. And I will admit, it took 3 weeks before there was a day where I didn't cry about what was happening, what we are seeing, and I'm desperate to get the hostages home, and I'm desperately working to do so. But the way in which Israel prosecutes this matters. Both Israel and Ukraine face existential threats. People are trying to destroy them. Hamas is not a liberation movement, as some kids seem to want to say on TikTok. Its founding principle is genocide, the destruction of Israel. However, how Israel prosecutes this war in the long term determines their long-term security, it determines whether we can be a partner of theirs, and it determines the future that they are choosing. It is difficult, but we should not be comparing Israel's conduct to Hamas. One is a terrorist group, one is a democratic country. They have to hold themselves to higher standards because that is their duty, and that is the way that we preserve the rule of law and the international rules-based system. It's difficult, but that is what we all have to do.
Nancy Okail, last word, quickly.
I just want to relate to the issue of the terrorism and the issue of a path. There's a myth out there that it is possible to just have this military operation that, I actually respect that Mr. Ehud Barak, frankly said, we don't know what winning means, or we don't know how, or the end of all this. But still, there is this sort of vague position that you will have this military operation, and once we're done with it, we're going to come to rights and political process. And when did that happen? Syria is an example. We were always told we just need to fight, stop ISIS and defeat ISIS, and then we'll come to democracy. And then Bashar al-Assad was treated royally in Saudi Arabia as if nothing had happened. This keeps on going. The idea that let us just go through the military path, that was never successful. Actually, it's the 15th anniversary, and 15 years ago, 2008, it was Operation Cast Lead, where Mr. Ehud Barak was the defense minister. And similarly, there are 13 Israelis died and 1,400 or 1,600 Gazan died. Where did that take us today? Where, from that time, with the reoccurrence of further hostilities and further military operation, where we are actually in a day where the numbers have more than doubles. But the thing is, these are not numbers. These are people that are dying. But the cruel part about it is that they're not just dying. They don't know they're going to live the next day. The unknown, that it's just as if this is something that is happening to us as earthquakes, as a natural disaster. And we talk about people being killed. No, people are not being killed. There are people who are killing, and it's not a natural that we can stop it. Just stop the killing.
We're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. As Nancy said, some of these statements, some of these arguments are hard to make. Thank you so much to the panel. Really appreciate it. And thank you to the audience. And let's thank the panel. Thank you.